Hi, my name is Diana Blake. I am a 65 years old American artist, and I am a dictator. Special emphasis on the first syllable. There comes a time in everyone's life when one would throw caution to the wind and just indulge one's pleasure, even when you're sure there will be consequences. I guess caution is meant to be thrown to the winds. Isn't this why people call a one-night stand a fling? Once upon a time in the quieter years of my life, when every sunrise blurred into the next and paintbrushes felt heavier than they should, I, Diana Blake, feared I had lost the one thing that kept me alive, my purpose. My art had always been my lover and my muse, but now it was mute, lifeless, drifting further from my grasp. I needed to wake it up, to wake me up, or I feared I'd fade into some hollow version of myself, like the outline of a figure never colored in. That fear is what led me to Nigeria, chasing some whisper I couldn't name, as though the rhythm of an unknown drum was calling me. It wasn't logical. It didn't even make sense. But something about this land glittering with an untamed vibrance promised me answers, or at least something worth painting again. The air was damp, suffused with the scent of sweat and spices, and the Lagos art market was alive with sights and sounds that swallowed me whole. The burn of the afternoon sun against my aged skin was bearable. It was the cacophony pressing against me that overwhelmed everything else. There were stalls crammed with beads, woven hats, and wooden masks, their sellers shouting over each other for attention. Children laughed while the drums played, hypnotic in their beat. The chaos was intoxicating but jarring. That was when I saw him, Uche. He was sitting with his back against a neem tree, knee drawn up, sketching as if oblivious to the relentless noise around him. His skin caught the sunlight, gleaming in a rich, deep bronze that made him look more like a carved statue than a person. His presence wasn't loud, but it was commanding in its quietness. There was something about the grace in the way he moved his charcoal across the paper, his fingers smudged black, his gaze steady and unbothered. He didn't fit into the chaos, he tamed it. I couldn't stop myself. I approached him slowly, feet shuffling against the dust, and when I stood before him, he finally looked up, piercing me with a glance that turned my legs to water. God help me. His eyes were arresting, dark and endless, like twin wells holding secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to uncover. "Do you sell your work?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended, almost trembling. Around us, the market noise continued, but Uche may as well have been a bubble of calm in the storm. He studied me for a moment, his lips curving just slightly into a smirk that hinted at something both amused and intrigued. "Sometimes," he said, his voice deep and rich, but controlled, almost indifferent. Then, with a gesture at the paper in his lap, he added, "But not this." The sketch was hauntingly beautiful. A woman, faceless but powerful, standing in a pose that suggested both surrender and defiance. It had an unmistakable sensuality about it, a rawness I hadn't seen in years. My thoughts betrayed me as my mind wandered deeper than it should have, lingering on what a mind like his might imagine in secret. "It's beautiful," I murmured. And that's when it happened, the feeling like I had been waiting for this moment my whole life, but only just realized it. The years between us didn't matter. The spark I felt seeing his work, no, seeing him, burned hotter than the sun overhead. Uche tilted his head, giving me a long, deliberate once-over. Not in the shallow way some younger men glance at women out of habit, but slowly, like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve piece by piece. "What brings you here, Ma?" he asked, using the polite Nigerian term for older women, though he didn't say it condescendingly, only respectfully. "Inspiration," I said, surprising myself with how earnest the word sounded. "And I think I found it." His smirk deepened before he stood, towering over me. He folded his sketch pad and slid his charcoal pencil behind his ear. "Art is dangerous," he said cryptically, his voice lowering like a warning I didn't fully understand. "You sure you want to find it?" "More than anything," I breathed. And just like that, my life changed forever. The next few days were a whirlwind. My obsession with Uche's art only growing stronger. I returned to the neem tree every day, watching him sketch and learning more about his process. He had a roughness about him, a rawness untainted by the structured teachings of art schools. But the way he shaded, the way his figures seemed to come alive, he could capture an emotion with a few strokes better than I ever could with the finest brushes. It was undeniable. I wanted him. Not just his art, but all of him. His hands, his thoughts, his energy that seemed to hum with restrained power. My obsession didn't go unnoticed. "You're staring again," he teased one afternoon, the corner of his mouth lifting into that now familiar smirk. He sat cross-legged on the dirt ground, sketching the wrinkles of an old fruit seller's weary face. "I hope I'm not your next muse. Would that be so terrible?" I shot back, though my voice shook just slightly. I wasn't used to this, to banter that felt oddly dangerous. With every word he spoke, I teetered somewhere between escape and surrender. He chuckled, leaning back. "It depends. Do you want to know me, Diana? Truly? Or will I be just another face on your canvas?" That name, my name, from his mouth caught me like a hook in the ribs. It startled me how intimate it felt, the syllables softer when he said them. Against my better judgment, I found myself leaning closer, my hands curling into fists to keep myself grounded. "There's nothing just about you, Uche," I confessed. The words slipped out before I could stop them. I swallowed hard, shocked at my own boldness. His smile dropped, his expression darkening. He stared at me for a moment, and I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. Desire? Curiosity? Something darker? Before I could decipher it, he slid his sketch pad into a satchel and stood up. "Come with me," he said abruptly, his tone low and unreadable. "Where?" My voice cracked. "There are things no market stall can teach you. If you want to understand the spark you're chasing, you'll have to trust me." Every instinct in me screamed at me to say no, but against all logic, I nodded. As I followed Uche through the crowded market and into an alley that felt too quiet, too intense, I couldn't shake the feeling that his warning about art being dangerous was more personal than I'd thought. I wasn't chasing inspiration anymore, not really. I was chasing him, and I had no idea where that would lead me. That I remember the first time I met Uche. His eyes held the wild, unrefined beauty of the lands around us. Sharp, deep, and layered with stories untold. I had come to document the artistry of Nigeria's remote villages, a project born from my love for colors, textures, and cultures that felt untouched by time. I never expected a face like his to occupy my canvases, or worse, my thoughts. As I followed him, my hand in his, I looked at him, trying to catch a glimpse of his face. He turned abruptly and stared at me. His lips curved into the kind of smirk that hinted he already knew the effect he had on women. "You're here for my art or me?" he asked with his teasing grin that sent a bolt of something both dangerous and thrilling through me. I convinced myself I wanted only his sculptures, his carvings, his interpretation of the world around him. "I want both," I said evenly, not daring to betray the nervous thrum in my chest. He agreed to show me, though I could tell from his sideways glance that he didn't take me seriously. Perhaps he thought I was another foreigner in search of a fleeting adventure, all curiosity, but no depth. Little did he know. We started our journey together the next day, moving through villages draped in sunlight, so pure it felt like gold settled on our skins. Uche was my compass, leading me past markets that smelled of roasted plantains and spice, beneath the wild breath of baobab trees, to corners of this land no guidebook could describe. At first, our conversations were light. He teased me about the way I held my sketchpad, and I joked about his stubborn refusal to wear shoes unless absolutely necessary. But like the undercurrent of some unseen river, a connection began pulling us closer. He wasn't just an artist, his words were art too. Each time he spoke, painting images in the air with effortless grace, I felt myself sinking deeper. I'd catch him watching me work, his dark eyes tracing my movements like I was the one on display. His laughter, deep, warm, sank hooks into places in me I'd forgotten existed. One evening, under the fading sun, he told me about his first carving. A knife no taller than his thumb smuggled from a marketplace. A mistake in the wood that had turned into his favorite piece. His voice wove through that story like a melody, and I found myself leaning closer. Somewhere between his words, we brushed fingers. The electricity of that touch nearly undid me. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. Valentine's Day drew closer, and with it, the tension I could no longer deny. There was heat between us, simmering just beneath the surface, daring us to touch it. It would begin innocently enough. We'd share a hammock after an afternoon of walking under a searing sun. The rains would roll in with their cool breeze, heavy drops teasing the earth, and we would lie there listening. One day, my shoulder touched his and he froze. He didn't move away though. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned closer. "Does the rain always feel this alive here?" I asked, trying to pretend my pulse wasn't racing. "It doesn't feel like this most days," he said, his voice quieter, now lower. "Maybe it knows you're here." Moments like that unraveled me. I started painting him, not just his face, but his soul. Each line of his body felt like a discovery etched into my work, each shade of his spirit captured in the strokes of my brush. I wasn't the only one changing. The first time his hand guided mine as I worked, I could barely breathe. He leaned close, his palm steady over mine as we moved the brush together. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my neck, and when his lips brushed my ear accidentally, or maybe intentionally, it was over. That night, we shared palm wine, sweet and tangy. It tasted more reckless with every sip. No, it wasn't only palm sign we tasted. We tasted ourselves. I held his carrot, and even though guilt was crushing my conscience, I decided to keep a straight face. I looked into his eyes and saw both innocence and experience. Uche was difficult to understand. One minute he looked the domineering man, and the next the one I the one I am taking advantage of. I shut my conscience up, telling myself that I'm in Nigeria and no matter what happens, no one really knows me here. Besides, we're both consenting adults. This was all the mind conditioning I needed. With this, I peeled every piece of clothing from my body and his in a split second as we sucked on each other's tongue. His breath was fresh and I could still taste the palm wine. I remembered that we still have a bottle left, so I got it, his carrot in my left hand, the bottle on my right. I formed a cup around the girth of his carrot and poured some wine. I drank and sucked and watched him squirm in an indescribable pleasure. Pleasuring him gave me as much pleasure as he was getting. I had a stream down there, and because my panties were pure cotton and nothing like a towel, it started dripping. Because hard and wet is a winning combination, I swore not to let my wetness go to waste. The way I mounted my young Nigerian stud, stallions would have taken lessons and paid their life's worth for it. I glided in his rivers and swam in his clouds. My melons rubbed his warm and scanty-haired, robust, sweaty chest. I augmented taking his entire length and playing with his tips, then rolling my waist and feeling the veins on the girth of the stud. Speaking of veins, they stood out like spikes and still felt like wet tendrils. I've never felt this good my entire life. When he was about to finish off, he dragged it out of me and fired his load on my belly button. 33 times. 33 times more was the number of times I rode on my Nigerian caravan. I knew I had to stop before I got too attached, too addicted to get entangled and not returning home. We painted together. We painted some more. We painted like we made love. You paint like you're running after something you're too afraid to name, he murmured, his thumb lazily stroking the rim of his cup. I didn't expect the words that left my lips. What if I am? What if I'm chasing something I shouldn't want? He looked at me then, and the weight of his gaze threatened to crush me. And what if it's something you should do? The air in the room crackled. Silence save for the crickets beyond the window. I couldn't breathe. The hotel walls, the low hum of the generator, the soft whir of the ceiling fan, they all faded. All that was left was him. I could feel the distance between us shrinking, as inevitable as a tide. His hand reached for mine, his touch light but deliberate. When his lips touched mine, it wasn't just a kiss. It was the undoing of every restraint I had placed on myself. God help me, he tasted like freedom. When we broke apart, his voice was rough. Say the word and we'll stop. But I didn't. I couldn't. This, whatever it was, felt like fire. It should have felt forbidden, wrong, dangerous. Instead, it felt alive. Still, I couldn't escape the whispers of doubt. What would people say if they knew I was drawn to him, a man so many years my junior? What about the unspoken rules, the invisible lines I was already dancing across? But there, in that moment, under the spell of his quiet brilliance and magnetic presence, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I wanted. I truly wanted. And that was terrifying. Life has a way of touching you in places you didn't know you were vulnerable. Sometimes it's a tender graze. Other times, it's a knife pressed tightly against your skin. Loving Uche felt like both. I chased the heat of him into a fire I didn't understand, and I burned willingly. On that Valentine's night, my gosh, it still lingers in my body like an aftershock. Every detail is stitched into my memory with such terrifying clarity. His weight on my hips, the brush of his breath on the shell of my ear, the quiet but deliberate way he whispered my name like a prayer, a curse, and a promise, Diana. I'd never been touched like that before, not just by his hands, but by his eyes, Uche's gaze was intrusive and soft at once, reading me in ways I didn't know anyone could. I let him in that night, but it wasn't surrender. No, it felt like finding something I didn't even realize I was missing. And yet, he left. Just like that. One moment. His arms were the only place my heart felt safe. The next, he was gone. It wasn't a whispered goodbye or fleeting look of regret before the door shut. There weren't any words between us, just the emptiness of sheets that once smelled like him. I woke up alone. His absence louder than any goodbye could have been. At first, I thought maybe I'd scared him off. Maybe he felt the weight of what we'd done, the taboo we'd crossed. The first blush of morning always brings guilt, doesn't it? And what we had done was wrong. It was unbearable innocence shattered by unrelenting desire. But it didn't feel wrong when his lips tasted my skin, did it? It didn't feel wrong when I dragged my nails down his back, begging for more. No, it hadn't been wrong. It had been electric. And he left. When I finally dragged myself out of the bed of the hotel that morning, something about my body still ached for him. My muscles hummed with memories, and my lips stayed swollen from his kisses. But in my heart, there was silence. A hollow sort of quiet that I couldn't explain away. Until I found it. The letter. It wasn't even addressed to me. No, he hadn't cared enough for that. He left it folded on his desk, as though it were an afterthought. But as I unfolded the delicate paper, as I read the words that weren't even for my eyes, my knees nearly gave out. There was another woman. No, not just a woman, an arrangement, a binding responsibility that tethered him to a life I didn't belong to. Her name, Alicia, practically screamed off the page in cursive boldness. This Alicia must have his keys. Keys to doors I have knocked on these few nights. Or knack, as he called it. From the letter, I learned how her family had business ties with his, and how there was expectation tangled tightly around their engagement. And there, in his own words, I read Uche's confession. Duty is heavier than desire. Duty. That's what I had been up against. Duty. I wasn't angry, not at first. No, it wasn't fury in me. It was a peculiar, muted sense of disbelief. I sat there in his apartment, clutching his betrayal in my hands, wondering how it could have been my body he held that night, only to belong to someone else by dawn. But anger came later, in waves. It crashed against me violently as I paced the floor. The man I thought I knew, the one who whispered my name in the dark with reverence, had a life I was never a part of. Every touch, every kiss, every deliciously filthy thing we'd done, it had all been tainted by a truth I hadn't known. I hated him right then. I wanted to hate him forever. But that's the thing about passion. It doesn't burn clean. My fury met my longing in a twisted, chaotic dance. I craved him as much as I resented him. I wanted him as deeply as I wanted to reject what we'd been. I didn't reach out to him, though. No, I'm not weak like that. My pride wouldn't let me grovel, wouldn't let me ask questions I didn't want answers to. Besides, our chapter had closed, hadn't it? He'd shut that door firmly without so much as a backward glance. I told myself he didn't deserve me. I told myself I didn't need him. Not his explanations, not his excuses. But here's the terrible secret I'll never say aloud. I would have taken him back. It was spring when I left for the US. The kind of spring that tasted sweet but felt cold against your skin. My flight was early in the morning. The dew on the grass still glistened under the pale sun as I climbed the stairs of the airplane. I told myself I wasn't running. But who was I fooling? I just couldn't exist in the same air as Uche any longer. He didn't know I was leaving. Hell, I don't think he would have cared. Looking back, I wonder if it would have made a difference if he had come after me. Would I have stayed? Would I have told him how much he dismantled me with his absence? Would I have begged him to choose me over his obligation? It doesn't matter now. What mattered then, as we tore through the clouds and Nigeria fell small below me, was that I carried him with me. Not his physical presence, no. But Uche was stitched into my soul in a way I couldn't erase, no matter how far I flew. He had touched me too deeply. His betrayal wasn't something I could spit out like the pit of a fruit. No, it was something I'd have to digest slowly, painfully. And even then, I didn't think I'd ever be free of it. And this still shocks me today, I wasn't sad. Not really, because Uche gave me something that no betrayal could take away. A piece of me, raw and unfiltered, had come to life in his arms. It didn't matter that I couldn't keep him. What mattered was that he was mine, even if only in that single, stolen moment. He loved me, God. I know he did. In his flawed, broken, heart-wrenching way, Uche loved me. And for a brief, ethereal second, I had the best of him as my inspiration. And as my best sexcapade partner yet. Will I visit Nigeria again? Maybe. Would I want to meet another Uche? Hell yeah. Thank you for watching to the end of this story. Do well to subscribe and click on the bell icon. This will help YouTube notify you when our next video gets uploaded. Where are you watching us from? Who is your favorite character? Guess what? You can share your forbidden confessions with us via email or WhatsApp, and we would most likely have it featured. Send it as a document via email to forbiddeneroticconfessions@gmail.com or as a voice note via WhatsApp to +44 741 831 6330. Again, it is +44 741 831 6330. I will see you again in the next video. Until then, stay sensual.